So why did I write this book, Midnight Jaguar: Tales of a Suburban Shaman? Well, I wanted to share my story of becoming a shaman. I think that, well, let me back up here for a moment. I put off writing this book for about 8 years. And when I say put off, I don't mean like I scribbled down notes. I mean, I would write like 24,000 word rough drafty outlines, and I would look at it and I was just unhappy with it. And it was mostly because, I mean, part of it was like I needed more time to let everything sink in, and I had all the very interesting details from some of the things I went through. So I had the story. I did not have enough time to let all of that condense to really be able to reflect on the things I went through, which I did in the book, and I needed some more time. But the other part was that I had a hard time figuring out how to tell my stories. And that's because so many of the shaman books, spiritual books, have this like deeply, no offense to these people, but have an have an inflated sense of self and their own importance, and it's basically written as like, I'm a guru, here's something I went through, here was my lesson, here's what you should do. I don't like those books. They're fine every once in a while. Sometimes you get someone who doesn't take themselves too seriously, but I just want to hear the stories, and I want to hear the vulnerable aspects of your inner world. Like I want the raw experience. And unfortunately, so many shamans are like possessed by the image of what it means to be a shaman. And they just get boxed into this weird seriousness where they need to be like all knowing. And that's insane. That's just, anyone who practices shamanism is just a human at the end of the day. And there are a million pitfalls in this path. And yeah, so I wanted to share a vulnerable and authentic look on not just like what it means to become a shaman, but in essence, like what it means to be this Western white suburban kid who became a shaman. I mean, it's a little crazy, and I had no intention of ever becoming one. And in fact, I fought it for a bit, and yeah, but with time, I realized that there's this idea of like somehow I'm participating in a culture that's not my own, and I'm sort of reducing it to some points that I want to use to profit out there. And that's fair. Like I've seen people do that. The more horrifying reality that is the case is that it's real. The things that shamans say, that many of them claim, the spirit world is real. The energy world, if you want to call it that, is real. And it needs to be taken deadly seriously. And it is a shared collective reality of all human beings. And really the most foundational spiritual part of what it means to be human. The first religious, philosophical, medicinal view expressed itself in the archetype of a shaman, someone practicing shamanism, and then that evolved into all sorts of various other religions. And so, yeah, you know what? I grew up Catholic. In many ways, I still consider myself Christian. I want to embody the teachings of Christ. I see that as on just a psychological level, like an evolution of consciousness. I see many of the Christian ideals as that, and yet at the same time, off in the Amazon, off in the Andes, not using psychedelics, practicing shamanism. And for a lot of people, I think they would see that as conflicting with one another. And I don't think that's the case. I think that shamanism has some really important things to offer modern Western society. First and foremost, the idea of rites of passage. And that was the thing that drew me down to be a shaman in the first place, was that I grew up in a culture that had no definitive line between the end of childhood and the start of adulthood. And you have seen the absolute tragic consequences of that play out, most notably in the political landscape, because in an indigenous society, when you have a functioning rite of passage, right before all that teenage angst at 12, 13 years old, the teenager goes out and he does whatever the rite of passage is. Maybe it's spending time in nature, etc., 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 right? Goes out. If he completes it, might not, but if he completes it, he comes back and he's welcomed as an adult into society. He or she is. And you have the elders of that community who have wisdom and perspective, but they lack vitality. And then you have the brimming youth and all the vital passions that come with that. And if they're an adult and their opinion gets treated with equal weight, they come in and they bring all of their creative energy and they pour it in and say, hey, this is how I think society should go. This is the thing I think we should do. This is what we're missing. And it becomes this union of the youthful energy and the elder wisdom, and it combines to help transform society. So the elders listen to all the ideas and they're like, yeah, no, that one's a really good one. Okay, let's do that. And they enact it, and society's better off. And that just doesn't happen in our society. And so the result of that, the first result, is this like teenage angst and anger and hurt and depression and eating disorders and just the tragedy of being a modern teenager, because they're not an adult and they don't have responsibility and they're doing anything possible to get some responsibility and to feel like an adult. And then it switches. And then you have the other side of things where people are 30, 40 years old and they're married with 2 kids and they decide, you know what? I don't actually want to be married anymore. I want to go drink and party like I'm 18 years old. And so they abandon their family. Or they have a hard time doing any chores and responsibilities and they call it adulting. It's the idea of taking care of the basic things in their life. It's hard. And it is. That's the worst part, is that if you don't, not only if you don't have a moment where you become an adult, but you don't have a society-wide recognition of that to reinforce that, you get ruin. It ruins everything. All of the passion and vitality has no containment. All of the old wisdom just becomes stagnant ideas and outdated perspectives, and society fractures. And yeah, so that was my upbringing. I, as a teenager, tried to push every boundary possible and then to get out of the responsibilities of it and the consequences of it, because I simultaneously wanted to be an adult, and also that was the last thing that I wanted. So I would act like an adult until there was consequences, and then I would slink back into, oh no, I'm just a kid, or I'm just a young man, or I'm in my 20s. And so I realized that, thankfully, pretty early. And at just after I turned 21, I went down to the jungle to drink ayahuasca. And yeah, I've talked about that in another video here, my unconscious initiation, my unconscious shamanic initiation. But I went down there to grow up, and I got a lot more than than I thought I would. So, yeah. I wrote Midnight Jaguar because I got sucked down a path that I had no intention of ever walking down. I have lived I've had some pretty strange and incredible things happen to me, and I wanted to share a vulnerable inside look at that instead of presenting the usual guru type shamanic image. So, yeah, if you're interested and curious at all what it looks like to practice shamanism in this nice modern world, or you just want to read a fascinating little series of stories, pick up my book.